Given the current scenario of English language use today in the world, which shows a large number of non-native English speakers turning towards English, and with these numbers increasing day by day, it is often predicted by world English scholars and researchers that the center of gravity for English language will soon shift from the inner circle countries, that is native English speaking countries, towards non-native English speaking countries, that is outer and expanding circle countries. In this module, we'll talk about how this language shift is taking place. As we have just said that a large number of non-native English speakers turn towards English, increasingly turn towards English. In fact, today we have a higher number of non-native English speakers than native English speakers. And because of this higher number of non-native English speakers, more people using English who live outside native English speaking countries, countries like the USA, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, more people living in non-native English speaking countries, in countries like India, China, Russia, Pakistan, Brazil, etc. It is very likely that the centrality for English language will soon be claimed by these outer and expanding circle countries, which means the inner circle countries will lose this control on the English language, and the centrality for English language will be claimed by non-native English speakers. With this shift and this claim for centrality of English language come the rights for the use of English language. So these people, these non-native English speakers, the speakers of English who live in outer and expanding circle countries, will soon claim for English language rights, the same rights which now are the claims which the rights which rest with native English speakers. These rights include the right to determine the standards for the use of the language, the right to make innovations, introduce new words, make changes in the structure, etc., acknowledge and accept the changes. All these rights the non-native English speakers are soon going to claim. One reason why the non-native English speakers claim for these rights is also because they do not want to defer to the norms of the American and British English, and it is quite justifiable because the context of use of English in America or in Britain or other native English speaking countries is very different from non-native English speaking countries. So the people who live in a very different context, who live in American and British context, cannot determine the standards or the norms for the use of English in outer and expanding circle countries. So the people, the speakers of English who live in these countries are claiming the rights to make these changes or make these innovations in the English language. Widdowson in Jenkins' book World Englishes discusses this difference between language distribution and language spread. According to Widdowson, language distribution is more like adoption or conformity of the language. So when you talk about language distribution, you do not mean any adaptations or innovations in the language. Distribution only means transmission of a language from one context to the other. The transmission, the unchanged transmission, which means the meanings, the words, the structures, they do not undergo any change, and they are just lifted and placed in another context. Whereas distribution, where spread involves both adaptation and non-conformity. When we talk about language spread, we do not mean transmission of the language as it is, but as the language moves from one context to the other, it also adapts itself, it changes itself, and these changes are made in response to the context, in response to the demands made by the new context of the use of the language. So spread is a more progressive kind of a concept compared to language distribution. So we are witnessing a paradigm shift in the use, in the perception of the spread of English language. The adaptation of English that we see all around the world today is a requirement of the context, and it matches the preferences of its users. So these adaptations are not whimsical. For example, because you live in an outer circle country, you want your English to be different. So these changes are not based on the whims and desires of its users. These changes are imperative, they are necessary, and they are a requirement of the context of the use of the English language. And because of these changes which are required in new contexts, the language claims are made by the non-native English speakers. And it's only when these rights are granted to non-native English speakers, when these rights are accorded to them, English can claim to be a truly international language. Because an international language is not meant to serve the purposes of a select few, it's not meant to please a select few, it is meant to be beneficial to all its users. So the purpose of an international language is to facilitate communication among people who use different first languages. It is not meant to facilitate communication between the users of other languages and the native English speakers. So, an international language does not serve the users, the native users of any language, and in this case, the native users of English. If English is to serve truly as an international language, then it should change itself, it should be open to these adaptations, and its users should be given the rights to make these adaptations, make innovations in the language so that English truly works as an international language.